Morning, morning. Can you all hear me, by the way? Is my mic working? My mic is on. That's a good start. Listen, welcome, everyone. Fantastic to see you all here. Fantastic to see the great room completely packed to the rafters. We have a complete sellout for today. What is our third Fellows Festival. This one is even bigger and even better than any of the previous ones. Hundreds in the house. Many more hundreds online. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for braving the elements and my fan club outside. We have a wonderful day for you scheduled, packed with amazing speakers, but as importantly, packed with other events that we can all participate in. And to be honest, this day works partly because of the speakers, but as importantly from the connections that you'll make during the course of today. We planned this year's festival to be bigger and better than ever. We've been hosting festivals through the week, but this is the pièce de résistance. This is the main event today. You'll have seen the program, you'll have seen the speakers. I hope you enjoy it. This year, some of you will know, is a special year for us. This is our 270th birthday, and on the back of that, we've tried to make this bigger and bolder and keyword, which you'll hear a lot today, more courageous than ever previously. This is the theme of the year. The theme is courage. We've assembled some incredible speakers with remarkable stories of courageous acts to make the world a better place that I know you will all enjoy. It's not just about the speakers, though, as I mentioned. It's as importantly, at previous festivals, people have said to me afterwards, the speakers were incredible, Andy. But you know what? I enjoyed just as much meeting fellows and chatting with them. So we've made today also about creating spaces and places where you can meet other fellows, connect, and off the back of that, perhaps even make change happen. You can do that in the room, you can do that online as well, using the hashtag RSA Fellows Festival, and also including our digital platform, Circle. I mentioned the full menu. There is talks, of course, there are workshops right around the building, including on some of the programs that we at the RSA are picking up. As importantly, some of the suggestions that you made as part of the day one manifesto we kicked off at the end of last year. There's also music, there is food, and there is crucially alcohol, but towards the end of the day, so as not to spoil it for anyone. Please take part in all and any of those. I certainly will be, especially the last of those towards the end of the day, and I hope you enjoy all of that. Listen, I'll say it again at the end, but I'll also say at the beginning, a huge thank you to all of you, not just for coming along today, but for your ongoing support of the RSA. Never been more important than just at the moment. And also a big shout out to the RSA team, and indeed the Company of Cooks team, that are volunteering today to make this festival a success. Easy to spot. They're in the t-shirts you'll have spotted. They are here to help make this. They're waving there from the back. They're here today, make today work as smoothly as possible. They're there to help you, so please use them. And I'd like myself to extend a huge thank you to them for bringing us together and making this a success. A small round of applause, I think, early on. I am truly blessed and incredibly proud of the staff we have here. They are of remarkable quality and have shown incredible integrity in driving forward our social mission, as today will demonstrate, and as the actions today will demonstrate. The world, we hear it in the news all the time, just chatting with Tim about it actually, has never seemed along some dimensions darker, or more divisive, or more despairing. And it's just for that reason that the RSA was first created 270 years ago, And that's why it's even more important that we press ahead today, that from darkness we bring a new enlightenment, that from divisiveness we bring even stronger collaboration, and from despair we bring an even greater degree of optimism. That is what today is about. It's about collaboration, it's about optimism, and it's about change-making for the future. And each one of our speakers today, I think, will be echoing all of that, starting with our fantastic first panel. I'm going to welcome them both to the stage, give them a small tee up. So one of our first panel is a man who 20 years ago stood and stared into a disused clay pit in Cornwall and said, I've got an idea. And that idea grew to what is today an iconic testimony, not just to creativity and ecology, but to what is possible. That man, of course, is Tim Smit. Where is Tim, by the way? He's right in front of me there. Eden has grown from that project, that idea, into something iconic, not just nationally, but globally. And Tim will be telling us a bit more about the magnificent journey he's been on, including the journey we're going on together, Tim and I, collaborating between the RSA and the Eden Project. And our second panelist in our first session, Emily Bolton, has also been at the absolute front line of change-making at a citizen-led level. Systemic change-making, including, especially recently, in Grimsby, a place, as we'll hear, in real need of change-making. And Emily has been making that happen as CEO of Our Future for the most recent period. It's hard for me to think of two people who can demonstrate that shared sense of collective action and optimism and change-making for the better than Tim and Emily. Please join me in welcoming them both to the stage. Where to start? I think with Emily, actually.
Yeah.
Because I want to hear a bit more, Emily, about the courageous journey you've been on, including in Grimsby, and how you're going about it and how you're making it work. Emily.
Thanks, Andy. Lovely to be here. It's a huge honour and such a joyful way to spend a Saturday. So great to be with you all. So I guess the journey and thinking of courage, I think courage is such a highly personal thing, isn't it? So maybe the journey starts with the personal story. So I have spent, as Andy said, about 20 years working at the intersection of social change, public policy, getting stuff to happen. Love the energy of, making transformative change happen in all sorts of things, from setting up the first social impact bond in Peterborough Prison to working on issues like perpetration of domestic abuse. So really diverse things, working with brilliant people to show that different is possible. On the personal side, about 4 years ago, I guess all of our lives stopped, didn't they? COVID disrupted everything. And it disrupted me even more. So I got COVID really badly, and then lived with the snakes and ladders of trying to recover, and had long COVID, and basically pressed a pause button on my life for a couple of years. And for a long time, and I've got a young family, and I spent a lot of time lying in bed. And for a long time, I wondered if I'd ever engage with the world again. So it's kind of remarkable to be here, really. But what, and it was grim. I mean, let's not gloss over it. But the upside is that I literally was an observer of the world and of the historic times in which we were living in. And my observation was that we're living through this moment of huge transformation, you know, not just building back or whatever after the pandemic, but how we respond to transitioning to a green economy, all of those things. But I felt like if we just kept evolving the status quo, we weren't going to get there to where we needed to get to. And I also probably had a pretty stark reflection on myself and felt as if, like, you know, I'd done good work and I loved everything that I had done, but I don't think I had been very brave. And if I think about my generation, so I'm a Gen Xer, I think we've been a bit weak, to be honest. I think we've coloured between the lines previous generations have given us, and we have been too compliant. We haven't stood for anything. What do we stand for? And what do we believe in? So I kind of promised myself as I laid there that if I did get better, I'd be a bit braver. And given that I didn't know if I'd ever be able to engage in anything again, I didn't really have much to lose. And so I thought that I would try and start building the future that I thought we needed and working with people who were doing that. So it's quite a long backstory, but kind of relevant. And so then the three things that really bothered me were green transition, it's happening. Secondly, we haven't done economic transitions desperately well in this country. There's parts of this country that have thrived and other parts of the country that it hasn't just removed their industry, it's sucked the soul out of the communities. It's taken the relationships and the fabric and our identity and what we belong to, everything. And because of that and other reasons, we're really polar. We don't trust each other. We don't believe in anything. We don't stand for something together. And was there a way, as we're transitioning to a green economy, to root the benefits and the prosperity and the good life that comes with that in deindustrialized communities? And in this journey of exploration, and in the early days, I could work like 3 hours a day or maybe 4. I met this brilliant guy who's now my co-founder, a man called Jason Stockwood, who had bought Grimsby Town Football Club. And he was really interested in the power of football and that love and belonging you have for football to kind of unlock wider social impact and kind of transformation in the places we love and belong to. So we set about trying to show what could be a national model, but to kind of prove it in Grimsby. And so personally, I have had the most joyful time partnering with amazing people in Grimsby. So our future is basically about how do we back brilliant leaders in deindustrialized communities across this country to harness the opportunities of the green transition and build a brilliant, flourishing future that they own and have agency of. Loads of detail behind it, but I've probably already used up way more of my time. So does that give enough context, Andy?
I mean, it really does. Yeah. Can I ask you, I know others in the audience are going to have loads of questions for you as well, Emily. You said at the end there, backing brilliant leaders. Where do you find them? Do they exist? Are they there? They just need nurturing and discovering?
Yeah, so I think we've got a bit of a myopic view in this country that we think that the brilliant leaders exist in London or Westminster or the city. And it's just nonsense. There are, like, gosh, I love the people I work with in Grimsby. Brilliant, innovative, not waiting for anyone to come and fix their problems, just getting on and doing it. Like, when I spend time with them, like my heart sings with hope for what can happen in this country. We are doing everything wrong by thinking that a bunch of clever people need to come up with the answers in London. Like, what would happen if we backed all the brilliance across this country? They're not waiting for me to find them. They're there. Like, you know, so yes, there's brilliant people there in droves, and what they lack is money, support, networks, a sense of solidarity, belief in them. If we can build all of that, the future of our country looks amazing.
So I think that's so true. The contrast currently between the sort of Whitehall, Westminster pillars, where everything is gloomy, doomy stasis, and out and about, which is full of energy and leaders. I think has never been starker. How do you create those? You mentioned the conditions you need to allow this spontaneous combustion in places. So tell me how to achieve that.
So I guess one of the problems is we always like a process flow, don't we? If like, I'm doing this activity and I can show you my outcome. The first thing is just about, and I guess that was the luxury of being sick, if there's such a thing. Like, I didn't have anything, I didn't have any power, didn't really have much energy. I just like rocked up and hung out with people. Do you know, like, and so actually the first thing is to listen, build trust, recognize what's there, muck in and be helpful. And then, you know, once you've done all that, you know, the ideas that exist could be 100x'd to achieve wider impact. And given my previous work, that's the kind of stuff I used to do. So now I can observe and say, gosh, what you do is amazing. And it could transform this place if we could just bring the right financing together. But the first bit is hanging out, building trust. I think the other element is also joy. I think so. I guess one of my other reflections is that I had been desperately earnest in my previous, and everything that I'd worked on was really serious, and it really mattered that it was done properly. But also, this work that we're doing, it's not going to get fixed next year, is it? It's the work of the rest of our lives, so it might as well be fun. And so every year, kind of that was one of my big goals. This has got to be joyful, and it's got to be way more fun than the alternative. And so we have a big party every year to celebrate what's awesome about Grimsby. And we bring everybody together in the town who's driving amazing change, but also, you know, lots of big funders and think tanks and investors just rock up to the party. We're all part of it. Starts in the brewery, ends up in the football club, and it celebrates local thinkers and you know, we have comedians and musicians, because this is about a whole place. This isn't about us silos. This is about what you belong to, what it means to you. And so I think also recognizing that if we want to change the problem, we better start approaching it in a different way and being joyful and making it better than, you know, what today feels like. Why not build the future right now and live in it?
One, that's wonderful to hear. And two, I know it's something that Tim also feels passionately in his bones. I might turn to you, Tim, and say a few words about, well, your thoughts on Emily's story, actually, and then I want to get on to your story too.
Well, I think Emily's great, and I'll join your political party. I think it's terrific. I think part of the duty we have is when you look at, if you look at the RSA, for example, the founding, rather ironically, they were fathers, which is a bit weird, but were very aspirational. And I find in our country we're full of well-educated people who've got the language of aspiration and the will to do fuck all. I don't wish to be political because this is everything. But what I'm about to say is true. I have met most of the front bench of the current political parties. I have yet to meet one I would give a job to. And I'm not saying that as a cheap shot. I'm really not. It's just that we were saying in the green room, just imagine, I mean, mental health is an issue we all talk about, and as I've been growing older and older and talking to lots and lots of people, we realize that almost everybody in this room will have friends, family, and all the rest of it who suffer from mental health. Just imagine we've got an entire nation that is suffering from PTSD, from all of that aspirational talk and failure to deliver. It is absolutely extraordinary that a nation as rich as us cannot organize itself to provide, I mean, list here any of the list of things that you think about, but the social malaise of the way we look at education as something that is done to people, and the way our universities are set up to, oh God, this is going to be the end of my career, but the truth is, no, I haven't had a beginning yet, it's all right. No, but the way we've set up our universities to mirror so perfectly the social class stratification in our country, so that you have universities that are not there for the civil society. They're there for their own snouts in the trough capitalist vision. I am a capitalist, by the way. I'm not listening to an anti-capitalist speech, but I find it absolutely astonishing that what happens is, as universities get more and more money, the people that went there believe that they must be getting better and better and better. In my case, I went to Durham. Since I left, that university's got better and better and better. Has it? When you go to those alumni dues at the end of a year, and the vice-chancellor, maybe even the chancellor, gets up and gives this long list of things to be smug about, and you're going, oh my God, you're proud of that? Really? Really? I mean, you know, we've improved this little bit of something with some CRISPR and something on the genome. Year after year, it's the same blather about this slow general progress. No one's saying, how come you've spent enough for an entire education system creating such incredible mediocrity and an inability to do what the RSA is supposed to be about, breaking down the silos, which is quite obvious to anybody in this room. That's it. So you can see we've got an awful lot in common, and to be honest, when I was in the music industry, the thing I noticed was London is so good at colonizing the talent that they've kidnapped from somewhere else to make it look as if this was hipper than rocking horse shit. And the truth is, you probably find every bit as the talent in Grimsby or the places that Ian's working. We're working in Dundee, Derry. Fantastically talented people, Derby, Morecambe, Eastbourne, all these places which most people in London haven't heard of very much. But the talent that we were talking in the green room, our job is to talk about courage, right? Is to be brave enough to say what the job is. The job is nothing less than exorcism. It is to go to places that have learnt to know their place, to take what's coming to them, to get really satisfied with the bleak expectation. You know what happens when you show something really good happens in a place? It all starts to lift, and suddenly people go, Christ, I live in somewhere really beautiful. And look, there is talent here. We've actually repressed I'm making it British, but we're repressing the talent in this nation by telling stories that are completely counterintuitive to our own experience there. What you were saying was absolutely right. The talent's there. Dundee, all you needed to do is put on some good parties. People don't realize this, you see. Two things to take away from today. The first is no one ever remembers someone who's well behaved. Yeah, no,
applauding there.
But the thing about today should be about thinking about the things we'd like to give ourselves the right to be angry about, on one level, and the other is, can you imagine the ugliest place in this country, right, and realize that if everybody in this room said, we're going to be killed 365 days from today, are you telling me seriously you couldn't make it beautiful? Of course you could. So knowing that we could do that, we've got to break down the things that stop us believing in the collectivized thing, making things marvelous. I'll shut up now, sorry.
No, that was... from both of you, rather magnificent, actually. Can I ask you, Tim, you mentioned the word courage there, and the theme here is courage. And is that how you think about yourself? When you're sitting looking at that clay pit, do you think, I'll do something courageous here? No. What did you think?
We overuse the hyperbolic language of marvelous, excellent, sensational. We're going to be doing things that are out of the box, leading edge, cutting edge, bleeding edge. And we're going to use joined-up thinking.
Yeah.
And I've heard you once say that you're going to think the unthinkable.
Did I say that?
No, but the truth is, I just looked at a hole in the ground, and I went back to when I was 12 years old and reading Arthur Conan Doyle and Lost Civilizations. And like any 12-year-old in spirit, I thought, bloody hell, that'd be fun. And that's the truth. That's the truth. When people say to me, Tim, you're so visionary, I go, no, I'm not. If my life depended on going to any school in this country and talking to anybody between the age of 8 and 14, you will find people who talk about, I'd like to build an amazing dam or this or the imagination is not in short supply. The visionary bit, if I was to be bigging myself up, was to believe that I had the tools at my disposal to persuade over 300 people professionally trained to only use the word no to say yes. And that is actually something where it's not courage, it is how can you use emotional and legacy threat to get people to reimagine who they are. Mm-hmm. Like, are you really going to tell your grandchildren you said no to this? Yeah. Just imagine the shame. Do you not remember the guy who turned down the Beatles? He said guitar bands aren't going to catch on. Just imagine, for generation after generation, that family's name has now been besmirched. You know, I mean, how do you get over that? No, I mean, the truth is, I discovered young something which is true, I think, and I wonder whether you agree with me. Inside every one of us, everybody in this room, there is something about the size of a coffee bean, which is called the disappointment. It is the disappointment we all feel at the person we dreamt we might become, and how far short we feel we've come from it. If you can then create a stage and a narrative arc in which we can all, even at 80, suddenly think, you know what, I might still get the blue ribbon for my imagination and do this stuff. And that's all an Eden project is. It's not about a Tim Smit, it's about believing you can do something amazing and then watching the energy released in all these talented people. And then, you know, like a toe rag, I take the credit, but you know.
And that echoes so closely with the story that Emily was telling about turning the no's into yeses in place. Emily, say some more about how you're going about doing that in Grimsby and how far you are you along the pipeline in creating that sense of belief, the no's into yeses that Tim mentioned, do you think?
So I guess the first phase of what we are up to in Grimsby is to build this coalition of the willing, collective sense of change. But ultimately, Grimsby and places like it also need more cash, but not just any sort of cash, because lots of places have had dollops of money that have done nothing. And so more of the money that works. And so kind of the first phase has been to kind of really root it in place, harness that sense of love and belonging, build a collective, both locally and nationally. So we have a Grimsby diaspora network. If any of you from Grimsby, you're very welcome to join. So where people who still love the town but don't live there anymore can contribute to the collective change underway. And then we have been backing and supporting people on the ground who are making great change happen. So that's definitely the first phase, connecting them with funders, fellowships, all of those sort of things, just opening up new networks. But alongside that, we have been thinking about what are the right structures of money over the long term that could drive change. Mm-hmm. And kind of we have 5 principles behind our approach. One is actually how do we start to harness economic trends for wider social benefits? So in a kind of policy world, you have industrial strategy here and you have social policy here, and often social policy is trying to like bail out the after effects of the economic strategy. And so actually what if we thought about them together? So in Grimsby, how do we harness the green economy in a way that the economy starts to be rooted in a place and benefits communities, and places have power and agency? So we're building kind of a collective with local and national green economy partners to kind of pilot what that would look like. Also looking at how you could back community-led housing so that communities have the right financing that they need to own their own properties, retrofit them, and gain power back from absentee landlords. And then the last piece of work we're doing is all about how communities can build their own future and create missions for their future. We're building a collaboration between the council, statutory partners, but led by community groups with residents setting the missions and having funding and support for action, but then also the kind of statutory partners coming alongside. So the start is about message and solidarity and coming together, but then that has to lead to practical action, because lots of this is about showing that different is possible. And it's, you know, like very rationally. People have been let down loads of times. It's a totally rational response. And so the only way to counter that is to start doing things and showing what's possible, both locally, but I think all of us want to show nationally. Actually, we don't have to live with the model we've got right now. A different way is possible. And people will pat you on the head and tell you it's a nice idea until you get on and do it. And then they say, oh yeah, that's great, I want to join. So yeah, that's where we're at.
And Tim, how does that fit with your experience at Eden and beyond? You know, in terms of the stage that Emily's at in the regeneration of Grimsby. Can you think about an equivalent stage where you were in your journey to where Emily is now?
We're at that stage in the projects that we're starting in Morecambe, in North, and in Dundee. Gosh, it's like a career-ending talk I've agreed to be giving today.
Keep going.
You've got to be honest about a number of things. The first thing you've got to be honest about when talking about courage is the lack of courage in middle-aged men. No, I'm really serious. The desire of middle-aged men who've just got their feet on the rung towards becoming an establishment figure are a cancer, because they stop talking truth to power and yield to all of the tropes that those who are more powerful than them have got. If you want proof of this, go to, let's say, what was DEC, the Department of Energy, and look at how good they're running. Look at how amazingly efficient and ecologically sound they are with so many interns. And then you ask, where have they come from, those interns? Oh, so generous, the fossil fuel industry, how kind, how kind. Do you know what cold anger feels like? I'll tell you, cold anger is when you're talking to a government minister about being able to make our country energy independent by 2030, and they smugly look at you as if you're someone who's just come down with the rain, and they know the truth. It's not practical. It's not practical. I wanted to do deep geothermal. Well, I did swear very publicly at Boris Johnson when he came down for the G7 and said it'd be really good if we were regenerative. And I said, if I had your job, mate, I could make our country regenerative. We have built a hole, drilled a hole 5.3 kilometers deep. The heat at the bottom of that tube is 189 degrees centigrade. You can dig holes like that all across our country. You've got to be a bit deeper in some areas and whatever. Do you not think if your great-grandchildren were able to talk to you now, and they said, and we said, would you mind us borrowing from the future in order that we can have our whole nation working on renewables, and then we can offer it at whatever price is suitable to get our economy going, right? Do you think many of them would say no? They wouldn't. But we are led by effing accountants who never finished their training. They're the guys who now run the big four accountancy companies and charge everybody a fortune, and they charge government a fortune because the ministers aren't brave enough to make decisions, so they prefer to have someone else to blame, right? But they only learnt the cost of things. Our biggest peril is that they never did the bit working out the cost of not doing things. And it's terrible for our country. So I agree with every word you said, and I think if we went to Grimsby or anywhere, part of the issue is that middle-class people, I am middle class, I'm guilty, right, talk about the green environment. Everybody's green these days. I'm an environmentalist, right, but the truth is most of them are pig ignorant about what they mean. Let me tell it you straight. If you are a capitalist and you believe in freedom of capital, the only way we have got a great future is to think of the tonnage, the percentage of waste of everything we've dug out of the ground or grown. If you can find an economy where the waste from one becomes the feedstock of the other and creates a circular economy, that's what a circular economy actually means, you have got a massive vault of wealth to mine before you even start thinking about trashing the world. But a circular economy, if we go, for example, to Grimsby, means that you understand the processes. you understand how mycorrhiza works, how mycelium eats stuff, how a political break on growing things like hemp, right? Hemp is probably one of the most incredible substances, plants. It roots nitrogen, it produces incredible building materials, it's the favorite food of mycelium. The seeds of it, forget cannabis, the seeds of it are loved by fish and prawns. The economies that are waiting out there to be made by getting people together to say, how's about we use the heat from that to produce king prawns, and the shit from the king prawns does this. The money from the king prawns is meeting our protein demands in our nation. And you know what's even more valuable than the meat? The chitin. They slough off their skin probably twice a day until they're older, and then it's once a day and then once every 3 days. That stuff is worth a fortune. The drug that comes from that stops rejection of transplanted organs and really gets your antibodies stirring. So you've got two economies already with that one thing. And then next to it, you're farming energy out of plant materials. And everybody, you know, you go and see ministers, they'll tell you it can't be done. I've seen it being done. I've been on a farm last week in Tydeford, which is already zero. It is net zero. The tonnage of energy, the liters of energy being produced from the vegetable stuff is producing carbon offsets. It is making money from the energy produced by cow shit. I've seen it. And we can do it across this country if we stopped for a moment to think what we mean by a green economy. Really, it is so exciting. The future is riveting. And I've seen it in America, in Massachusetts, where we've got partnerships, and I've seen it in Singapore. And the biggest thing and the most exciting thing is all these young people who are so frustrated by people of my generation. I went to a factory in Singapore where there's 70 engineers, scientists who'd formed one company, and they're like antibodies themselves. They will build a blood bank, they will build a fire engine, they will build robots, but they're working together to do stuff at a speed which we can't cope with. Our country is so stuck in the concrete of process that we don't know how to break our own rules. And that's what you're here for. Right.
Now, I sense in the room lots of questions, so I'm going to go to the questions from the floor. And there's some roving mics, so wait for the mic before you ask your question, so we make sure we capture it. And we'll start here at the front and then go a bit further to the front.
Thank you. I'm Jill Wright from the Organisation for Responsible Businesses, so specifically for Emily, but for everyone really. Emily, you were talking about brilliant people. Are you finding that a lot of those brilliant people are stepping up from the small business community?
So hold that thought, Emily. I'll collect a couple of questions perhaps, then go back to Tim and to Emily. Here and then maybe over here.
Hi, Titus Alexander. Thank you very much for such an inspiring opening to the day. And it reminded me, I worked for the Scarman Trust, which gave small grants of up to £2,000 to thousands of people, and had exactly the kind of thing that you described, that flourishing, and people went on to do things. And very often there was sometimes a single individual in the council who enabled things to happen, but very often there were all the people blocking it, and similarly ministers. Now the question is, that was brought to an end by ministers of the last government, and there was one minister who made it happen. What would you like to see from an incoming government that could unlock that potential that you're talking about at a local level? Thank you.
Another great question. We'll take one more here, and then we'll go back to Emily and Tim.
Thank you, Andy. Absolutely inspirational kick-off to the event. I'm so pleased I've come through the rain. My name's Colin Crooks. I'm a social entrepreneur. And I just want to slightly redress the balance a little bit in respect of deprived communities in London, because it's not all gloss and wonder here. And I've most recently worked with small businesses, micro businesses in estates across London, very deprived areas, and trying to galvanise local authorities, funders, other support for people who are struggling to start something against huge odds of discrimination and adversity and challenge of raising children, etc. I found that to be an absolutely solid block in exactly the way that you've described in your descriptions of what you faced. So my question is, how can we institutionalize creativity? How can we change the way our bureaucrats work?
3 fantastic questions. Emily, we'll go to you first.
Great. I'll try and answer them all together. So Jill, I don't think, so our work is really sector agnostic. It's about citizens in a place, and actually probably that's part of, I think we all live in our silos way too much, and actually you get great ideas by talking to people who come from very different worlds from you. I don't think the brilliant entrepreneurs exist in any sector. They come from everywhere, you know, whether they're community members just getting on and doing stuff. There's definitely some brilliant small business owners who believe in the town and are creating great new businesses or running existing businesses. There are some brilliant entrepreneurial, to use the term, people within the local authority too that are getting on and trying to make things happen. And I think your point, Titus, about finding the enablers, yeah, that has always been my role. Find the folks who care about the same stuff as you and form a band and get together. And so, yeah, definitely central to all of this. And your ask of government. So I think it probably starts with a change of ethos, that actually I think we need a politics of respect, a politics that respects all of us and the contribution that we do and that we can make to our country. Actually, if we're going to unlock all this latent potential that exists across this country, and it's there and we need it, firstly, you kind of have to respect each other and want to contribute. So I think we need to have, you know, this sense of respect and that we're all in it together. And that's a starting point. But then we also need to think about how we build in the kind of infrastructure and systems that ensure that the right money is getting into those communities, that it's long-term, but also money alone isn't the answer. And so how do you kind of bring in that kind of galvanizing lightning rod force to bring together the collective for change? And yeah, Colin, yeah, you're right. I wasn't meaning to denigrate London. We have our own issues here, and it's just that sometimes the national narrative can be a bit biased, but you're right, and it would be wrong to say that there aren't hugely deprived communities in our city, in this city, that we should be pretty outraged about too. And it sounds like you're doing amazing stuff. Yeah, I think in creativity, I'm sure Tim has way deep, but I think we've stopped. So another thing that I do is I sit on the board of Matthew Bourne's New Adventures, and part of that was because I really cared about joy, and I think his productions are really joyful, and I really cared about creativity and working out how we can make that more of the everyday rather than a kind of niche thing. And my kids are young and in school, and I wonder how much creativity is prioritized, and actually that is both where the great ideas come, but also probably the stuff that gives your life substance, doesn't it? So I don't have any answers, but I agree it's really important, and it would be great for us to have that as a more integral part of our day as children and adults.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay, continuing my career decline. One of the first things I ought to say, and it's a really hard thing to say in a public place, is that I've met more corrupt people leading NGOs and charities and organizations that are supposed to be for the common good than I have in business. Because there's a real mistake when people talk to you like a sort of slightly damaged Old Testament prophet, and they talk to you about the worthiness of the task. That is kind of a defense against people saying, but are you any good at it? And one of the things I would say about social entrepreneurship is I used to get really depressed about the fact that the Eden Project won social entrepreneur business for year after year. And why that depressed me is because I could see, it's like a chasm. One of the things we don't do in this country, which for example in Holland they do, the organization which used to be the equivalent of the Regional Development Agency or the Rural Development Agency, if you got money, you had to go on courses and you had to go to a common place where there were, I know having dismissed accountants, but some of the good accountants and lawyers, a collective people that say, you do have to fill in your VAT form, you know, or this is how you do it, this is how you send an invoice. An awful lot of the self-employed and the social entrepreneur people I know are incompetent. It doesn't mean they're not brilliant people, but it's a bit like telling a child who puts one big circle and then a smaller circle on top and 3 lines, what a beautiful cat. When you should say, what a dreadful bloody cat. If you're a good parent, don't tell your kid they've done a nice cat. They don't learn. They will then keep giving you a damn squiggle with another squiggle. You know, you've got to make it worth doing a real pussycat. Okay, that's the first bit. And I just felt I had to get that off my chest. The second bit is law. L-A-W, the, as in authority. What is it about our culture which enables us to think that the law is a good thing, and then we don't actually ask lawyers to do anything good at all? No.
They say no. That's all they're trying to do.
Oh, my dear, marry me. No, I better not actually. I've just proposed to someone else, but you know, I don't want to commit a crime on. You know, that'd be like. But seriously, let me ask you some questions. I did this at the Oxford Farming Conference, right? My personal taste is to go to the real farming conference, but I'd been invited to speak to the toffs. And I was the keynote speaker, and I said, I want to form a political party. And I said, is there anybody in this room who does not believe that the rivers in our country should run clean and their water be available to all who live in that country? Nobody put their hand up. I said, okay, let's move on to air. Is there anybody in the country here that thinks their children and grandchildren should be forced to breathe the air that other people have supposedly got the right to poison? Nobody put their hand up. On a winner, I thought, is there anybody here who feels the same about the wildlife of our country and the health of our soil? These are farmers, right? This could have been a tough one. And anyway, to get to the end of the story quickly, there was not a single person in that room, over 1,000 people, who believed that it was morally supportable to poison the water, to poison the air, to drive it. Stay with me, people. If all of us believe those things, what the F is the law doing, not enforcing that if you get the right to become, for example, a limited company, it means that you are limited from some liabilities. We, the people, give you that right. Well, damn it, if we're going to give you that right, you have also got some obligations, and the accountancy profession has also got some obligations to audit every company, every group and organization, that they do not poison that which is common to us all and necessary to our future. How is it possible that anybody has got away with pretending that's a left-wing socialist, nut cutlet eating, patchouli oil smelling kind of activity? It's not. It's about us. And it's about us, this is the bit that we were saying at the beginning, being brave enough to say, actually, no, that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to give you, the water companies, another 15 years to get your act together, by which time you've killed off almost all the microorganisms. And by the way, you know, the whelks and shoreham are already hermaphroditic. And you know, all those people who go to classes in Hampstead and talk about population and what we've got to do to stop population, don't worry. Another 20 years, we'll all be sterile. Don't worry. And we're letting it happen because we're actually fighting over tiny things. And actually, this is a point of principle. And we should actually go back to that word, the commons, and work out how people manage to enclose those commons that we should never have allowed to be enclosed, and they should never have been politicized. So, your question about what law would I make, I would make it an offence that will close your company down and lead to your personal punishment in terms of money or jail for doing things which affect the commons knowingly.
Yes.
Institutionalising creativity? Tim, on that one? What do you say?
The word creativity and institutions to me feels like it feels like an oxymoron. I would say I don't know whether any of you here have read that wonderful book by James Bridle, Ways of Being, when he talks about the assemblies. And the really interesting thing about creativity in assemblies was, as you remember, ancient Greece. Not as you remember, you're not all that old, but you know. Ancient Greece, the assemblies, in order to stop cliques developing, you voted, and the voting things would come out, and you could accidentally find yourself Chancellor of the Exchequer. You may think this is a mad system. Actually, it worked pretty well. Do you know the first time they built another assembly after ancient Greece? 2016, Ireland. And the idea was they appointed a chair, but the 99 other members, or 100 other members, were all chosen like lottery out of people that were just the electorate that were old enough, and they were asked to take the subject of their choice. And this is an amazing insight, what happens, because they chose to make, I think, abortion, birth control, the first issue that they're going to. The newspapers of Ireland, the establishment of Ireland went bonkers. Look at this irresponsibility. Look what's happened to all these people without a proper education. You can't trust them. Our country knows what is best. Anyway, 3 months later, having called all these experts to speak to them in the House in the Dale, you know, right? They found that 60-40, they were in favour of abortion. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? The so-called establishment that was representing what we, the people, thought, didn't have a clue. So 2 years later, they did it again, just for fun. And they decided a very uncontentious issue, same-sex marriage. Catholic country, that'll do, that'll be a good one, won't it? Same result, 60-40. We, the people, are far smarter and humane and emotionally intelligent than that which is representing to be our view. And I think we should trust in ourselves more.
All right, we've got time for 3 more questions if we're really quick. So let's go, let's take here in the middle, and I'll take 2 others. We'll go over this side of the room. Go here in the middle, and then let's take a couple there on that row. Sorry.
Do I go first?
Yes, you go.
Okay. I guess it's sort of a question and an observation. If we're speaking on the theme of courage, if you know, in the systems thinking space, one of the first things they tell you to do is to observe yourself in the context of the whole system and realize that, you know, in some way or another, you are contributing to the current result that we experience. So, you know, in the context of the RSA, I'm looking around, and I know London is quite a diverse place, but it's quite skews older and more white. I mean, I'm white, but and I was just wondering, sort of, why do you think that is the case? And if there's a way that you think we could maybe be more inviting to younger people and people from more diverse backgrounds. And that's, you know, a question for you, but also for Emily and the King of Honesty in the middle.
King of Honesty. You should put on your business card, King of Honesty, in the middle there.
You both expressed a lot of frustration about the lack of imagination, the myopia of the political system in the UK, and you know, the failure of ambition and courage of those who are making decisions at the moment. Tim, you mentioned something good that you admired that was going on in Holland just recently. Could you both give a couple of examples of other parts of the world where there is excellent political or economic or social practice going on from which we should be learning, so that we ourselves turn outwards to the rest of the world and we don't just sort of die in a morass of despair about what's going on right here.
Wonderful. 2 more questions here on this row. So.
Hi, yeah, just a similar question actually. I just wanted to understand, you're talking about the great practices that are happening in say, Grimsby or Dundee or in Cornwall. How can we kind of communicate with each other? How can we roll these practices out to other parts of the country? How can they learn from you? Is it through technology, the internet? You know, how can we communicate with each other and kind of build on these great practices?
Wonderful. And just along the row, and then we'll go back to Emily and to Tim.
Hi, I grew up in Grimsby and Cleethorpes. Oh, it's gone off. I'd really like you two to get together, if that's possible. That's my first question. Secondly, Emily, could you put some thought into making football part of a healthy, productive, cyclical system? Professional football? And also, could you have some thought as to how the massive salmon factory farm that's going to be developed just down the road from the football stadium is going to be made part of a healthy, cyclical, productive system?
4 fantastic questions. Emily, I might come to you first.
Well, actually, it should be you first.
Yeah, on that.
You were asked about the RSA.
Yeah. I'll get to that at the end.
Oh.
Emily.
So asking your question about politics, I wonder if it's worth us thinking about what's the job of politics? Because actually, are we looking for them to lead us, or are we looking for them to back us?
Yeah.
And maybe we have been getting it wrong for too long. And actually, it's really easy for us to blame all of them over there for not having a good enough vision or not doing the... But actually, haven't we all been a bit passive too? And maybe we should work out what we want, the future we want, go and build it and ask them to back us. And so I think that potentially, like, we don't want a politics that is kind of necessarily telling us what to do. What we want is a political system that treats us as adults, understands what we want as a country, seeks to build some unity without making it vanilla, and backs us to get on with it. And so there's political leaders all over around the world who have more of that ethos, but I'm not sure that I've seen exactly what I dream of happening elsewhere in the world. Why can't we be the country to go and build it? And then, love that you're from Grimsby and Cleethorpes, and it is, for anyone who hasn't been, it is phenomenally beautiful. Our role of kind of using the football club is, or partnering with the football club, is around this, like, the connection. Often football is the longest relationship people have in their whole life. How do you harness that connection, love, solidarity, identity to achieve wider change? You asked loads of good questions about the role of football in a cyclical system. A, I don't run the club, and B, I am definitely not an expert in football. So they are really great questions, and I could connect you with lots of other people who are thinking about other things like that, but I'm not sure that's my expertise. And then I can also, there's a salmon farm being proposed, sort of aquaculture salmon farm being proposed or going through planning in Grimsby at the moment. And there's kind of debate about it. Also happy to pick up on that because there's there's kind of lots of elements on that. I'm not sure I have anything more than you guys could say on diversity at the RSA, but certainly my view is the more eclectic a crowd you get, the better ideas, the more creativity. To go back to if we sit in our own little worlds, then we're never going to have anything new or new ideas or think outside of the box. So always better to, widen the room. It's also far more democratic. So, Tim.
Brilliant. Tim.
One of the things about the RSA, I'll answer your question before you do.
Excellent.
It's like when you get you're with a whole bunch of people and they say, oh, we get a student to design that from the art college. And people are always appalled when I go, yeah, really? Have you not realized they're called students? What makes you have this kind of hippy-dippy view they're going to do something really great? We've kind of archetyped the word art student as being fantastic and creative. Almost every great creative statement in either marketing or advertising or indeed anything else is by professionals. People are really good. That's why they go to art college, to learn how to become really, really good. And I think one of the issues that the RSA has to battle with is the status of something which is about excellence, that at the one end of it, it also has to have excellence in terms of the democratic voice. And so it is, how do you marry the things of bringing people who are excellent in terms of the voting of a membership group or whatever, so you arrive at a status of excellence, and you are wildly and widely diverse. I think that's the question. And the reason it's an important question is there is nothing worse than tokenism, but the tokenism that is often tokenism is actually to do with the laziness of not actually gone out to look for excellence where you weren't previously looking for it. Therefore, my trust in days of yore, when you ask the older trustees to find good women trustees, they would actually tell you there are none really of that quality. What they meant was, I don't get out much, you know. And I think that's something we ought to really take on board, because there really are brilliant people from every background, and it's only our own blinkeredness that stops us seeing that. Well, I've forgotten what the other question was. What was it? There was another series of good questions, but I've forgotten what they were.
Examples internationally?
Oh, examples internationally. There are lots of examples internationally, but they're not national. What I mean is they are groups of people acting in a particular way. What is really interesting is that many of the accession countries in the EU, countries that were first of all snaffled by Hitler, then by Stalin, and then were under the Iron Curtain. And people forget, for example, that Czech Republic, or Czechoslovakia as it was the world's leading engineering country by miles until it got snaffled. And people are surprised when they go to Prague now and they see a city that makes London look really a little bit, you know, like some provincial place. I mean, these guys, they're making up for lost time. And I worry about Britain and its self-satisfaction at having been a leader. The irony is the people who make people here feel that they're leaders are the very people that would have been outsiders. The people who are in the rock and roll industry, the people in the film industry, the theatre industry, those difficult types. But we've actually created, and the games makers, right? Which means that globally our soft power is ridiculous. It is so out of kilter with anything else. So in Singapore, for example, a country of a certain conservative bent, if you like our form of democracy, it has a working thing which is radical. Its working principle is to create a country in which everybody earns a really decent amount as a living wage, where everybody can have a house. You can have one early if you get married, but you can get your guaranteed one by the age of 35 if you're not. They're enshrining in terms of the sort of thing that we don't do and we can't do, but we're happy to sit around dinner tables with a nice glass of wine talking about how we're the beacons of global democracy and how we've got all this opportunity. We ought to go back. That's why something, not to be weird about the RSA, if you're going to deconstruct why you might build an RSA today, what would it be doing? There's a danger that one roots oneself in a glorious past where people had, you know, when it started, it was possible for some people to argue they knew everything that was known. You know, we don't do that now. And I think there will be loads of people that will loathe an organization brave enough to re-examine its roots. But there will be loads of people 100 years from now who will be deadly grateful that it did. And I think those that run the RSA, and I make no comment, he's a friend of mine, but I make no comment about the who. It is Everybody will hate people who are the bearers of change, and we know that, and we know that we ourselves are like that. So we've got to be quite forgiving and permission-giving to go down that route. But the last thing I'd say about the Singapore thing, the excitement, the riveting excitement of seeing these young people who are no longer listening to institutional strengths, but are doing these things. I mean, like, Christ, this place that invented a fire engine in 7 months and got it built, and it's now the fire engine for Singapore. The blood bank for Singapore, which was out of whack. And everybody who designed it knew nothing about blood. Mm. That is really interesting, and you're seeing it all over the place. And we need to engender that spirit. Actually, the institution in the country that stands for that is here. Isn't that odd? I mean, you know, you'd say it was a conservative body, but it's not meant to be. The people who set it up really believed in that transdisciplinary, almost spiritual Ruskin-type thinking. You know, I'm blathering a bit, but I think it's really important we give permission for people to do that stuff, that we recognize and allow it in ourselves, and we police it in others, because no one's as good as us. That's the truth. I will make a prophecy that within 20 years, the Britain you're discussing now won't exist. It will seriously not exist. The world I have seen, what you're going to have in 20 years' time is something called muscular localism. Volvo, I have a Volvo, right? Volvo believe that within 15 years, they won't even have a supply chain. They will do it through the internet, and there will be little local construction stations all over the country, all over the world, where these things will be built. Every type of entertainment you can imagine will be brought to you, whether you're living on the Welsh moors or in the Highlands of Scotland. Everything will be made, will be done, will be made safe. Every doctor in this country will be able to carry out really, really tricky operations and have IT backup to identify things, allowing them to do what they're good at, which is being nice and supportive to patients. Well, some of them anyway. But you see what I mean? The only thing you've got to ask yourself is, what is government for at that point? And I would say the only thing I can imagine they're going to be good for is defense. And the only reason you'd want defense is if you were really crap at diplomacy.
Well, we have to wrap up. We're out of time. I will answer that question. Well, I'll do it quickly now and at length afterwards. But I mean, short work to do. We need more fellows that look like you and a few that look like me, is the truth of it. I met someone this week in his 20s. This is young change making, doing a PhD in engineering. He said, sod that, I'm going to go to Ukraine and ask how the skills of an engineer might best be deployed in helping out in Ukraine. Didn't go with a solution, went in search of a problem that he could help with. He alighted on the problem of broken windows in houses in Ukraine on the front line that have been shelled out, that have been a source of injury, but also a source of heat loss and damp. And said, I'm going to create a solution to that. He went back to the UK, worked with some experienced hands on engineering, and came back with a cheap, non-shatter, triple protected, triple glazed window for 10 quid. For 10 quid, that'd be fitted not by a professional window fitter, but by people in their own homes. He's rolled it out 20 odd years across 20,000 houses in Ukraine, providing protection from the shelling and heat and warmth and depth. If he can do that off his own bat, what can we do as a collective and what can we do as RSA? And I'm very optimistic about that. We've doubled our numbers of young fellows, by the way, over the last, is that me? 9 months, which is good, but much further to go. Listen, we mentioned democracy. Let's see some now. So, quick show of hands. This is sortition in practice, Irish sortition in practice. Hands up, who has found today's session inspirational? I think that's democracy in practice. Please join me in thanking the absolutely magnificent Emily and Tim.
everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If you'd like to take your seat, sir, whoever isn't taking a seat, that would be lovely. Welcome to our second session on courage and climate. My name's Martin Wright. I'm a fellow of the RSA. I'm also director of Positive News, the media cooperative that's focused on good journalism about good stuff. And you might be forgiven for thinking there's not so much good stuff going on when it comes to the climate and the nature crisis, the evidence of the seriousness of which is becoming more and more apparent every day. And indeed, if you hoped that that evidence of the threat to, I don't know, the little matter of all that we love and hold dear would trigger this back up the agenda, you might be forgiven thinking over the last year or two that this is sadly far from the case. We've seen the climate crisis being eclipsed by war in Ukraine, in Israel, Palestine. And we've also seen something of a backlash. The phrase people use is a green lash, which it can at times almost seem like there's a concerted campaign to play down the threat of climate change and play up the costs and the risks of tackling it. So we've seen strident claims that net zero will bankrupt Britain and hammer the pockets of the poorest. We've seen farmers on the march across Europe decrying climate regulations and campaigning against initiatives like rewilding. And we've seen climate skeptic parties gaining ground also all across Europe. And of course, the looming prospect of that arch climate denier winning a second term in Washington. All of which could leave you feeling a little bit downhearted about the prospects of tackling the climate crisis. In which case, be not downhearted, because here we have an antidote in these two people. They've got the courage to meet the climate and nature crisis head on and inspire others to ignore the skeptics and embrace a more hopeful vision of the future. That's appropriate because, as you've been hearing today, courage is very much the theme of the RSA in 2024, and these guys, I think, epitomise courage in action. To introduce them, on my left, Professor Lorraine Whitmarsh, MBE. Lorraine is an environmental psychologist, hugely experienced researcher, academic, looking at how we can live well as individuals and society, making the changes that we need to make to confront the climate crisis. She's the director of CAST, the Centre for Climate Change and Social Transformations. And I suppose one person who epitomizes those kind of transformations is the guy here on my right, Kabir Kaul. He's also a fellow of the RSA, London born and bred. He's a wildlife writer and campaigner. He's a member of the Mayor of London's Rewilding Task Force and the RSPB's Youth Council. You might have seen him on TV. He's reported on Springwatch. He started a blog which has got the most fantastically punning title of Call of the Wild when he was 13. And I think it's fair to say you packed more into your teenage years than most of us would do in several lifetimes. Kabir is also a living reproof to the rather lazy trope that environmentalism is only the concern of the posh and the white and the privileged. That is so not the case in your case, Kabir. But let's just start off with you. What first sparked your interest in this stuff?
Well, Martin, I've always been interested in nature somehow. It sort of arose organically. There wasn't one person, one family member or friend that directly influenced me. I think the earliest memory I can have of being interested in nature was as a 4 or 5 year old looking at David Attenborough when Planet Earth had just been released and seeing all these amazing animals, these giraffes and flamingos and moles and crocodiles, and thinking this is incredible that all these species, I can see them here, all these wonderful animals. Then I became quite nerdy. I started looking at animal encyclopedias and trying to memorize the taxonomic order of all the animals. And that's what I did for many years. And then I really enjoyed seeing this huge diversity of wildlife. And then eventually I looked outside on one day when I was 7 or 8 and looked into the garden and thought, all these animals I've been reading about, I've been watching on David Attenborough's documentaries, are any of them in my local area? Can I go out and watch wildlife locally? And surely enough, I did see lots of wildlife, mainly birds, so I became a birder. And I went to all these different local parks and gardens and nature reserves and found the most incredible wildlife, including one wildlife site, Ruislip Lido in northwest London, which has a couple of hundred migratory ducks that come from the Arctic every winter. And I thought, this is incredible. People need to know about it. It's in an urban area, and that's how I became a campaigner for urban wildlife. So it was a rather organic journey, but it started from when I was very young.
And you've been involved in all sorts of other things. I mentioned a couple of them. You've also been involved in drawing up the nature reserves of London map and campaigning for London to be a national park city, but London to be actually an urban national park. You've also, you were telling me just before we came on, you've scored a real victory in Ealing, of all places. And I say Ealing of all places because it's about rewilding Ealing. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, so in Ealing there's a meadow called Warren Farm, and we received some unexpected news the other day. I'll get onto that very soon. But Warren Farm is a 61-acre acid grassland habitat, and acid grassland is very rare in London, and with that acid grassland habitat there will live a lot of rare species, lots of rare plants, insects, and skylarks, and over a quarter of London's skylarks live in Warren Farm. Now, the council wanted to build sports pitches on the land, and they had set out in another strategy that there were actually better places, more suitable places to redevelop for sport other than Warren Farm. So we proposed to them that there's a field adjacent to Warren Farm which is not as ecologically valuable as Warren Farm, and we wanted them to build there instead. And I can say that it was very unexpected, but we received news from the council that they'd finally agreed to build on the land adjacent to Warren Farm and designate all of Warren Farm as a protected local nature reserve for the skylarks. And that is something that we had been campaigning for years, so that this site could be legally protected and the skylarks could be safe for future generations. So there'll be a long way to go. And it's very exciting news. There's a long way to go, but it's all about having these constructive discussions with the various different stakeholders involved, and I'm very, very optimistic about the site's future.
I'm tempted to ask, how do you find the time for all this? Because I mean, you're 18 now,
yeah.
So you've still got school, college, boring stuff like that, which you have to attend. Well, I will ask, how do you find the time for all this?
Well, I started when I was 13, so I've been doing this for nearly 6 years now. Been campaigning, wearing a number of different hats with the RSPB, London National Park City, and a few other conservation organisations, and now the RSA as well. But I do it in my spare time. This is what I'm very passionate about, and I enjoy collaborating with people who are also passionate about the environment. During my A-levels, I put that on hold because that was the main priority. But I'm in my gap year now. But I'm on my gap year between leaving school and going to study geography at university in September. So I found a lot more time to work in my roles, my different conservation roles, and learn a lot about that, whether it's practical conservation or policy making, and it's been fantastic. Interesting.
I mentioned that you'd been on Springwatch, and a few months ago I interviewed Chris Packham. And Chris Packham is a doughty campaigner, but when he's away from the screen, when he's not doing his sort of chirpy chappy stuff on screen, he can be quite thorough at accentuating the negative. He talks about conservationists having failed. And because I was doing this interview with him for Positive News, I just keep badgering him and saying, come on, Chris, give us something positive. Give us a sense of where do you find hope? And he said very gratifyingly, he said, well, I find hope in young people, in young people's passion and in their activism. And I absolutely know that you were one of those young people he had in mind when he said that. So if I sort of turn that question around to you, where do you find hope?
Well, I find hope in passionate people working together. I think that's what conservation is all about. I think that's what the RSA is all about. I came here and I've been a fellow since June last year. And it's been really wonderful. I've met fellows of all sorts of different, with all sorts of different professional backgrounds. And in the conservation roles I'm working in, whether it's practical conservation or policy or campaigning, I find it really uplifting to see so many people from so many different backgrounds coming together to make change. And it can happen, as shown by Warren Farm. It was years of many different campaigners working together on social media, lobbying the council, working with councillors, and change can happen even on a local level, and that makes you feel empowered to do even more. So that makes me feel positive, that there are passionate people who can work together, and it achieves very positive results.
Yeah, yeah. Turn to Lorraine. I mean, does your research, does it bear some of that out? Do you find that that's something which runs through things?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. A couple of things that I'll pick up on that Kabir mentioned is that the successes that he was talking about was about people coming together, actually, people that are passionate and committed, but also trying to find some commonality to sort of break through maybe deadlock. I think that really speaks to a lot of the things that we found in our work, which is that some of the sort of green lash that you mentioned earlier, and that shouldn't be overstated, I think, because we do know that the vast majority of people are very concerned about climate change, but on certain policies and certain interventions, there has been some backlash. Often that is, at least in part, to do with people not feeling that they've been included in decision making, that the changes are being imposed on them in a way that doesn't appreciate their circumstances. So I think there's a lot to be said about kind of engaging people, and that's really where our work is focused. How can we work with the public? How can we bring the public with us, whoever that is, the sort of people that are really sort of active in this space, to play a role in the transition to net zero and to tackling climate change?
Because that has been something which environmentalists have really struggled with. How do you get this out of the bubble? How do you persuade people this is something that is of relevance to their lives and that, as you say, they have some agency over? I mean, what are the conclusions you've drawn in that regard?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, speaking to this point of hope, we do see that the majority of people are worried about climate change. A small minority say that they have kind of eco-anxiety, climate anxiety. That's slightly higher amongst young people, probably because they feel they have less agency and power to do something about climate change, I think, as well as the worst of the impacts being further into the future as well. But this idea of sort of empowerment is absolutely crucial, because I think a lot of the time we're sort of led to believe that the public, if they have a role to play at all in tackling climate change, it might be as a consumer. So maybe you can buy an electric vehicle or a heat pump if you can afford it, and there are huge cost barriers for a lot of people. But actually, there are many, many more things that people can do beyond their role as consumers. People are citizens, they can vote and protest, they can do things as part of communities, they can do things in the workplace as professionals, and they can be a role model for people around them. So for friends, family, neighbours, there's some great research that shows that you're significantly more likely to buy a solar panel or an electric car if your neighbours have got one. So you just look around you and you sort of see what other people are doing, and that starts to shift social norms, actually. So there's lots of things that I think people can do, and it is, I think, about reminding people that those roles are varied, that we can do a lot, even if sometimes it seems like we can't.
Yeah. I'm just going to try, just to move on to the next point, a little vox pop here, which will be an opportunity for you to stretch your hands and put them up. Just hands up if you feel we can definitely tackle the climate crisis. We have it in our power to tackle the climate crisis. So we've got a healthy majority, I'd say about 3/4. As you know, this is also being live streamed, so in case this wasn't being broadcast, the hands up, about 3/4 think we can. Hands up if you think we are doing so. We've got half a hand. No, we've got about four hands out of, I don't know how many people there are here, maybe 120 or so, a wild guess. So that's slight gap between possibility and reality. Finally, just out of interest, and I think the RSA is a particular sort of audience, it would be interesting to see how people respond to this one. Who has some sympathy with the green lash in the sense of maybe we talk too much about win-wins, this is actually going to be quite tough, that there is a bit of skepticism around net zero, etc., etc. Who has some sympathy with that? Okay, we've got, I would say, a healthy minority, maybe 15 people or so. Does that sort of vaguely match what you found in your research, Lorraine?
I would say what we've basically found is that the majority of the public support many of the sorts of net zero policies that would involve behaviour change. So we've asked the public about whether they would support things like frequent flyer levies, which are where you would pay more per flight that you take each year. Environmental pricing, so that you would pay more for things that pollute, and you would pay less potentially for things that are less polluting. Phasing out gas boilers, electric vehicle subsidies, lots and lots of different policies of different kinds that would imply people changing their behaviour, and we find support, broad support, not universal, but majority support for those policies. And yet we also have seen some obviously high-profile examples like the ULEZ charge and 15-minute cities and low-traffic neighbourhoods. At certain local levels, there has been significant protest, but even in those areas, if you poll you get a representative sample of the public, generally there is more support than opposition to those policies. So it is important, I think, to sort of look at who is protesting, and they may be a very vocal minority often. And there's other research showing that if you ask the public, what proportion of the public do you think is concerned about climate change, they will tend to vastly underestimate the numbers. So it's about 80-something%, and people think it's about half that. So people don't actually know that their worries about climate change and their support for climate policies are widely shared. It's because of the sort of the very vocal minorities that protest.
That certainly bears out my own experience. I live in the People's Republic of Hackney, and there was huge, noisy opposition, or I should say noisy, not necessarily huge, noisy opposition to a series of low-traffic neighbourhoods. And various candidates stood at the last local elections on anti-low traffic neighbourhood platforms, and in fact the council was returned with an increased majority. So it seemed like the silent majority was there for action. Turning to Kabir, I mean, in terms of your peer group, your mates, do you feel any sense of scepticism, people getting a bit weary about everyone banging on about climate change, or just the opposite? What's the feeling?
I don't think my generation are as weary as they are anxious, because a lot of young people feel that they don't have the opportunities to act, or they don't know how they can act, whether it's a lifestyle change or whether they can improve biodiversity in their local area. I don't think there is enough education at the moment. It is improving, and there are more young people who are receiving these opportunities, and that's brilliant. But I think for the moment that there is still a lot of anxiety. I think often there is this in the media. There's often this idea of environmentalists being demonized, and they are regarded as this is not a priority. This is something that only this minority of people feel, and we should get on. If it's government, they might say, well, we should get on with delivering what the British people really care about, but they don't really think of the environment in mind. So I think earlier you were talking about green lash and also environment not being on the agenda. And of course, there are so many issues in the news that matter to people, and rightly so. But I often feel that the environment is overshadowed or is almost forgotten about. And if the environment is forgotten about in the media, then young people will, when they read the news, they won't see anything about the environment. Or even if it is in the media, often it's not in a positive light. So we need more positive news stories about the environment that people would feel empowered by. And they also need to be educated about it. They need to be told about the opportunities that they could have in their local area to make change. It is improving. There is going to be a natural history GCSE. Tim Smit, who was on before us, he has supported that. He's been involved with that in the past. I think it's fantastic that we're at this stage where There will be a GCSE available to many students across the country, and that will be, I hope, revolutionary and empower young people to make a difference, whether it's practical conservation or ecology, but at least they have that really good, strong foundation to say, I know what I can do, I can confidently make a difference. But I think it's all about changing the narrative, having more environmental news stories in the media that people can feel uplifted by, and people know that they can take action positive.
And in terms of education generally, is it doing the right thing, did you find?
The natural history GCSE? Or
No, much more generally, in terms of your experience of education,
yeah,
and how that prepares young people for the climate crisis. Is it getting it right?
It's getting better, but I'd say it was a little bit of a struggle for me to begin with. I set up a wildlife society in school when I was much younger. I got the support of my headmaster, who happened to be a very keen birder, and that was fantastic. And we managed to get a lot of very curious young people who were very curious about the environment, and they wanted to learn more. They're very open-minded. And then when the pandemic came, they all started to plant flowers and put up bird boxes, all the stuff that we discussed at Wildlife Society in our meetings and the small differences you can make. But I feel at the moment there's a very piecemeal approach. It's getting better, and when I say that, there are often more paid traineeships in sort of local wildlife trusts doing that. There are volunteer groups going into schools from the local parks and local nature reserves and educating young people on the practical differences they can make. But there's no coordinated top-down direction yet, but I'm optimistic that that will change. There are financial problems in schools at the moment. We wanted to plant a hedge, and I was going to write up a plan for that, and then they said, sorry, we can't do it, there's no money. So there is a problem in the sense that we don't have enough, not every school will have enough money, not every school will be able to afford new staff, to train new staff in this, or get the right equipment, but I think there needs to be some sort of top-down direction to begin with.
Yeah. Does that accord with what you found in your research?
Yes, it's interesting you ask about climate education, because colleagues of mine have just been evaluating the curriculum, the secondary school curriculum, in terms of how and where climate change is taught across subjects. It's still very siloed, so it's in one or two places, like geography, for example. But very much the solutions are framed in quite technologically oriented ways still. So it's often about kind of changing the energy supply, so moving away from fossil fuels to renewables, which of course is a big part of the solution. But it very rarely really talks about the role that people can play in tackling climate change. So I think that part is really quite absent in the curriculum at the moment.
Are there relatively easy wins, straightforward wins that we're just missing?
In terms of education, or
in terms of wider public engagement, including education, but also adults.
I mean, there is no government strategy on public engagement around climate change. That is a complete deficit that they've said that they will at some stage address, and they have not yet. There just hasn't.
Why do you think that is? Are they scared of seeming wokish and nanny-ish?
I think some of it is ideological. I think there is a sort of a feeling that the government shouldn't be intervening in people's lifestyles, that that's too interventionist. So there is a concern there that might be unpopular with the public, although our polling suggests that actually that's not true. But there is also, I think, just a lack of understanding about the extent of social and behavioural change needed to tackle climate change. There is a bit of techno-optimism. Actually, it's quite explicit in some of the government policies that you see, that there is just huge faith in technologies to save us, which we know from scientific assessments are not going to be sufficient by themselves.
I guess that's partly the issue, that technology that's just over the hill but probably coming down in 10 years' time, it's an easy way of kicking decisions into the long grass, isn't it? Yeah. You can say, oh, we'll have net zero by 2035 or 2040 or whatever, because by then we'll have, perovskite solar panels and it'll all be incredibly straightforward. I mean, is that part of the problem?
I think that is part of the problem, and there is a desire, I think, to look for the economic wins as well. So it's about kind of, thinking about how can we support sort of green jobs and business, and that's certainly very important. But then it's also, I think, about thinking more holistically about kind of the economy and thinking, well, maybe we need to be thinking more about kind of the circular economy. So it's maybe not about kind of, making more things and sort of making those greener, but actually holding on to things for longer. And so actually having a more, sort of repair economy, all of those sorts of things, which doesn't necessarily challenge the fundamentals of sort of, economic growth if we don't want it to, but it is about kind of thinking about things in a different way, I think, to how we have been.
And it's much less shiny and sexy from a political point of view, isn't it? It's not big numbers.
There is an assumption that if people are consuming less, they're less happy. I think, this kind of people, in order to sort of increase well-being, people have to consume more. Yeah. Actually, the evidence suggests that's almost the opposite, actually. We've done work across a number of different countries showing that people that have the greenest lifestyles tend to have higher well-being, so they will have a lower carbon footprint but higher well-being. So it really challenges this assumption that it's about going green is a sacrifice.
Mm-hmm. Do you engage with politicians at all?
Well, I've been I was a member of the London Rewilding Task Force. I think that was really, really eye-opening and insightful, learning from so many different people about wildlife in London and nature restoration and the governance of the environment in London. So the London Rewilding Task Force was a group of conservationists and ecologists and politicians from around London that came together, convened by the Mayor of London, to look into different ways in which we can restore London's wildlife and biodiversity on a very large scale. And I was involved in that in terms of advising the environment team on how best to engage young people with the environment. So I think, Lorraine, you were talking about how sort of policies often sort of geared up for sort of consumption, and that's often seen separately from climate and the environment. Here I felt it was much more optimistic and gave me the optimism that there is the political will, it does exist to restore nature and the climate crisis, but in a way that involves everyone. And also in a way that says that we can join up wildlife sites, we can get people, we can improve people's access to nature, but that is not separate from growth and development and that sort of thing. You can sort of tie the two in together. It's not an either-or situation. So to view it in a much more holistic way is, I think, the best way forward. And I felt that's what I took away from that experience, that there were so many different people with so many different opinions. And at the end of the day, our report positively said that London can be rewilded, and people from the very beginning do have that responsibility to get involved with these projects, and we should get them involved, but also in a way that's very inclusive. So it's viewed as in the sense of climate justice being tied in with social justice, that it's a part of improving quality of life, and they're not two separate things. So I think thinking of the environment and strategies around the environment much more holistically is a good way to do things.
And politicians are fond of telling people what they want, including telling young people what they want. Have you actually had encounters with politicians locally?
Locally, not...
Or nationally?
Well, when I have spoken to politicians, the politicians that I have spoken to, across parties, on a local level and on a national level, I think they are aware of the environmental concern that young people feel, that it's all very doom and gloom, that net zero targets are being ignored or being delayed, and not just the government, but both major parties have rode back on environmental policies, and I think that has increased that climate anxiety. I don't think, well, of course, as you mentioned earlier, not all politicians feel the same way about that. They might feel a bit sceptical, but I was in a round table in Westminster in October to discuss the future of the natural history GCSE and how we can best deliver that in schools. And it got cross-party support. There was the chair of the Education Select Committee, Robin Walker. He was very supportive of it. There was Vera Hobhouse, the MP for Bath, the Lib Dems, and a number of other MPs in the room. And it showed that it's not, yes, it can be a political issue and it can be used in a divisive way or in a political way. But at the same time, there are politicians out there who do feel that collaboration is better and collaboration is the best way forward, and it's not it doesn't have to be a party political issue.
You tempted to go into politics yourself?
Well,
you've got 100 votes already.
Not as a politician, no. But I've been very interested, especially from my time on the task force, in policy and making change through policy.
Yeah.
And I feel that it can take a very long time. There was a recent win from the RSPB recently where sand eel fishing was completely banned in parts of England and Scotland. And that was a real win, but that took 25 years, so it does take a very long time in some cases. But with the London Rewilding Task Force, it just took 1 year. So that was fabulous. If there is the political will, and politicians are willing to see the environment and the climate crisis as a priority, then I would feel optimistic. But I would want to, though I still have a lot to learn about that, and I'm learning a lot about policy making and the sort of process of making policy and talking to politicians and working with lots of different actors and stakeholders. But I feel that that is something that I'd be very, very interested in going into, especially after I finish university, into policy making and lobbying.
Interesting. You heard it here first. Let's take some questions. We've got some roving mics, so please wait for the mic. We've got quite a few of you want to ask a question, so if you can keep it fairly brief. And we've also going to have, I think, some questions popping up on this screen here from YouTube. So given that there are quite a few, I'm going to take a few at a time in geographical clusters. So if somebody with a mic can start at the back of the room over there, please. And we'll take, say, 3 at a time, if we can remember 3 questions.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm Sarah Anderson, I'm a GP from Brighton. And I was thinking about what you said about I'm wondering whether people can be rewilded.
Huh. Absolutely, yes. People can be rewilded. Oh, sorry.
I was thinking back to what Tim Smit said about the imagination of childhood and whether we can encourage that. And I've got 2 specific questions for the panel. Is to what extent do you see yourself as part of nature? And if you're part of nature, are you an individual or are you an ecosystem?
Let's take that one straight away, because I can't hope you'll remember 5 questions on the trot. Lorraine.
Oh, good question. I think Kabir's going to be more qualified to answer this, but in terms of do I feel part of nature, I think often I don't. I live in a middle of a city. I don't have a garden, and I think it's quite hard to find that nature connectedness, which at a sort of theoretical level I can sort of see humans are part of nature, but it's on a personal level it can be very difficult to really experience that, I think.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I also live in a very urban area. I'm very lucky to have a garden, but I just need to do more with it. And I think that would make me feel more part of nature. And I think I would need to get outside more nowadays and go birding again. I think, do I feel like I'm a part of nature? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I think if I've immersed myself in nature, if I've found a local wildlife site, I'm lucky to have many wildlife sites on the edge of northwest London, on the Middlesex boundary, which is very biodiverse. There's a huge valley there, a Colne Valley, with loads of lakes and wetlands. If I'm walking through a place like that, I feel like I'm immersed in nature. I feel like I'm part of nature.
Excellent.
And I feel like I'm part of that ecosystem.
We'll take the other couple that were here.
Thank you, Catherine Cameron. Hello, Martin. This is a question for both panellists, and it picks up on what Martin's doing with positive news, really, about the role of reframing. So reframing action on climate, that we know it's a win-win for the planet, for future generations, and for us. So it's not courageous, it's common sense. So if we could reframe that changing your diet is not about giving up meat or dairy, it's about eating that will benefit you. Energy efficiency is not a hassle and a pain to do, it's going to save you money. So is there something about reframing? Volunteering is not giving up your time, it actually means that you have community, you have courage, and you have better health and mental well-being. So could we talk more about reframing and less about courage?
Thank you. So the win-win, win-win-win.
Completely agree. It's a really big part of the work that we do is how can we communicate climate change in ways that resonate more with people and the things that people value. And so I think you're completely right. There is now the IPCC, for example, their latest assessment report actually showed quite clearly that the vast majority of things that we can do to mitigate climate change have wider well-being and sustainability benefits. The health benefits being amongst the most well-evidenced. So actually most of the things that we can do to reduce emissions are good for our health, for example, walking, cycling, changing our diet, etc. So I think absolutely communicating that is crucial. So that reframing, the other bit of the reframing I would say is around, I think there's tended to be, the media way of representing climate change has often been on sort of the impacts and maybe a bit of the doom and gloom, and we need to focus more on the solutions and the fact that actually there is a role for people to play, and people are starting to act. So I think the solutions framing as well as the positive is crucial. Yeah.
Hold any thoughts, Kabir Kaul. I'm just going to take a couple more questions. We've got somebody with a mic, have we?
Hi, I'm doing my A-levels at the moment, and in terms of climate education, do you think that GCSEs is enough time? Because it's 2 years of an education that takes 12 years, and there's a lot going on during those 2 years. So do you think we should start earlier, start in primary school, and keep going up to A-levels, have, you know, a natural sciences, natural history, A-level, and other topics that link together? Because they're so divided, like biology, geography, A-level, they don't link up. But can we have those links to make climate education better?
Yes, I understand what you're saying about how the GCSE is just one aspect. I think there is already a lot of good work going on in primary schools, but the big sort of gap is between primary school and secondary school, where there isn't really anything at the moment. Once the GCSE comes in, it will bring in elements of biology, geography, geology, ecology, nature, and I think that will be a very positive step. But I agree that there would need to be something in post-16 education that would further what has been established as a foundation at GCSE. So I think we shouldn't expect all young people to be passionate about the issue of climate change and nature, because not everyone is going to be passionate, but they'd have an interest, they'd be curious about it, and we'd encourage them to be open-minded. So the more people who take we hope there'll be more people who take the GCSE after, at some point when it's rolled out. But I'm hoping that there will be some encouragement by the teachers or by the school to say that you've got this strong foundation. Seems that you're really interested in this. Why don't you go to post-16 education, a practical course or something in A-levels? But I think it should be actively encouraged once the GCSE is in place.
Let's try and take another little cluster of questions. My word, we've got a lot. Let's do the central belt here. If you could pass the mic. If you could keep your questions brief so that everyone gets a chance, that'd be grand.
I plead guilty to being a politician. The question I want to ask is about culture wars, which seem to be worse and worse, and the social bubbles. And we're all here in one bubble, and we can talk to one another, and we all think how wonderful we are. But there are other bubbles who are we just don't touch, and they're not hearing this. Yeah. And what does the panel think we can do to try and bridge social bubbles?
Lovely, thank you. And then a person next to you, I think, had their hand up. Let's just... over there? Yep. Go ahead, please.
Mike. On the theme of positive news, this past month, February 12th, we have biodiversity credits in policy now, which is a positive. And so my question is, I'm hearing you talk about the challenge of valuing nature. It seems an underlying tone. So now that if we actually have a policy constraint, a market constraint, that actually puts a pound and pence value on something of a unit that we call biodiversity, do we actually now begin to see levers where, in a market economy, we actually see people's behavior aligning to greater biodiversity and seeing alignment instead of destruction for concrete over
interesting.
trees?
Thank you. So just take those two, breaking out of the work bubble and biodiversity. I don't know if you want to say anything about biodiversity net gain in response to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably more, I think Kabir can probably speak more authoritatively about that side of things, although I guess what I would say is we absolutely need to kind of shift the incentives and disincentives. My work's more on kind of climate than biodiversity, but we see the same sorts of issues that at the moment people say there are cost barriers, there are, you know, it's very difficult to do the right thing, and yet people do want to. So I think and one of the most popular policies that we found was changing pricing to reflect environmental impacts such that you pay more for more polluting things and less for less polluting things. So actually it does retain some choice for people, but actually, you know, they're rewarded if they make a good choice, essentially. So I think that is likely to be part of the solution. On the culture wars, yeah, I completely agree. And of course, with sort of, you know, social media and so on, it can kind of reinforce a lot of these divisions. Some of the work that we've done has looked at deliberative democracy and climate assemblies and citizens panels and so on, as ways of bringing together very diverse and ideally representative groups of people. I was involved in Climate Assembly UK, so that was the only UK-wide climate citizens assembly on climate, which brought together over 100 members of the public, completely representative of the wider population demographically, but also in terms of climate attitudes. So you had everybody from, you know, extremely concerned through to completely dismissive and sceptical in the room together. It was a little microcosm of the country. And there was an opportunity there over several weekends for these people to discuss and debate and talk to experts and people in the field about the solutions to climate change, and to come up with their recommendations, their own views about kind of how the UK should get to net zero. And they came up with some very ambitious policy proposals, actually, that go beyond what the government is doing. But this is from a group of people that are extremely diverse. But when you get them in the room together, you can look at the evidence and you can weigh up the pros and cons, and you can look at these wider benefits, these co-benefits, and actually say, well, even though I'm not particularly concerned about climate change, I can see that in terms of energy security, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of fuel bills, some of these solutions just make sense on that basis. So actually, it was fantastic to get together such a diverse group of people. And we see some of this happening at local level, where communities are coming together around, say, air pollution concerns or road safety concerns. And actually, there might be fantastic climate benefits to some of the stuff they're doing. So, but they don't have to be bought into climate concern. It's actually they're doing it because of some other sets of more proximal worries. So I think it is about sort of understanding where people are coming from and seeing what they have in common, even if maybe on climate or some other issues they might be somewhat polarised.
Yeah. Kabir, any thoughts to that, including biodiversity net gain, if that's something that's come across your radar?
Something I'm very new to, yeah. So biodiversity net gain, I'm glad it's finally been implemented, it's finally mandatory. I think, Lorraine, in regard to behaviour changes, I think you'd be more able to talk about that than I would. But,
do you want to just explain what biodiversity net gain is, in case people don't?
So I think, and someone in the audience correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's where the government has placed a mandatory 10% net gain in biodiversity on developers. So what they will need to do is, when they're building a new development, they will need to restore biodiversity, protect biodiversity, but once they finish the development, it must have 10% more biodiversity than it already had before the development took place.
Although not necessarily on the development site itself.
But not necessarily on the development, it can be off-site. Yeah. Will that lead to behavioural changes? Well, I hope so. No system is perfect. Biodiversity net gain is not perfect, but it's a very good step in the right direction, and I hope that will encourage and hopefully embed sort of more environmentally minded thinking in developers' minds in the way that local councils work, perhaps, when they are delivering these new developments. And I think, going back to what I said earlier, too often I think the narrative is it's either or. It's either development or growth or the natural environment. It's either the built environment or the natural environment, when you can link them together and they can work together, and hopefully in due course we could be seeing that with biodiversity net gain. I think with regard to culture wars, yes, there is a lot of division. The environment is often used as that topic in a political way. You can see it, Lorraine, you said on social media, you can see it a lot in the media. But as I said earlier, I think it's all about promoting the positive news stories that have been taking place. There are success stories that are taking place. And yes, we do have a long way to go. Our net zero targets have been delayed, and that's a real disappointment. But especially on a local level, I think one of the people who asked questions, I think you said that you were from Brighton. In Brighton, they've mandated Swift boxes. They were the first council in the UK to mandate Swift bricks, so now every development has a responsibility to put up Swift bricks, and Swifts are very rare birds. They've been in decline for a very long time, and they migrate all the way from southern Africa and Central Africa to the UK, and often they are completely dependent on buildings. But Brighton and Hove has led the way with that, and they have mandated bricks in all new houses and commercial developments. So if we can highlight and shine a light on those positive news stories, and hopefully that will empower people. Yes, we've got a long way to go, but there are very good things that are still happening.
Lovely. I'm going to cheekily go about 2 minutes over time because we did start a wee bit late. I'm afraid I'm just going to take 2 more questions from the people who've already got their mics in their paws. So the lady behind, first of all.
First of all, thank you so much. What an inspiring session this has been. I'm a children's author, an educational campaigner, and we can see the power of imagination and capturing children's imaginations so early. And the evidence is right in front of us about the generational scalability of children's imaginations. It's wonderful to hear that there's more going to be doing a more robust approach in schools. But obviously, there is so much pressure put on schools to do more and more. I feel sorry for teachers in the classroom. So is there, can you give us any examples of where business and community are coming together to support education in a way that supports a culture of change in our young people?
Thank you. And one question here.
Hi. I wanted to talk about public engagement. I just want to say we are starting a Swiftbox project in South London, so thanks for your tips on that. With regard to the public engagement, I do feel there is a certain level of scepticism about the government and other parties' commitment to net zero and climate change. I'm not going to go through the individual changes that have been made, but unless there is a serious commitment from government and the next government, I fear that a lot of people will just shrug their shoulders and say, you know, it's someone else's responsibility. So I feel there needs to be leadership, there needs to be a strong delivery plan, and also, as part of that, I think you've got to make it really easy for people to make these changes. There has to be some subsidies and money. You've got to make it easy, because most of the assets, the houses, etc., are in the hands of older tranches of the population.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So we got role of business and community in education, and then we got the role of politicians and public engagement. If you'd like to answer either or both of those quite briefly, and then finally, I've given you both a magic wand. You can wave it, and one thing that you wave your wand over will definitely happen. What is that one thing going to be? We started with Kabir, so I'm going to start with Lorraine to finish off, and then Kabir.
I'll try and take both of the questions together, because I was involved in the House of Lords inquiry on behaviour change for climate and environmental goals about just over a year ago, and it came up with a fantastic report that said government is absolutely not doing enough. The public is on board in terms of wanting leadership. They don't see that leadership at the moment, and they want to play their part, but they find that it's very difficult. So government absolutely needs to be making it easy for people to do the right thing. They need to put in place regulations, incentives, and so on to enable people to change their behaviour. So that was very consistent, a very clear message that came out of that report. And in the same report, there were some examples of where businesses had been quite positive in engaging with customers and their employees as well around sort of taking action on climate change. Marks and Spencer's talked about some of their initiatives to encourage people to reuse clothes, I think hold on to clothes for longer, and I can't remember all the other examples, but there were some nice examples of where some businesses are really taking quite a lead in this area. So, and on the wand, shall I answer
Magic
that?
wand, please wave your wand.
I would say, I mean, there's so many things I could have said, but probably the lowest hanging fruit, because it's just win, 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 would be to insulate homes in order to reduce energy demand, address energy security, reduce energy bills. We're in a cost of living crisis, to address indoor air quality. There are so many benefits to doing this, and yet policy is in completely the wrong direction in this space. So that would be my top thing.
Lovely. Thanks, Lorraine. Kabir, you're the only person standing between these people and their lunch. So if I could invite you to keep it fairly brief.
I will be as brief as possible. I was involved in a consultation 4 years ago with regard to business and community working together and public engagement. It was run by the Grosvenor Estate during the pandemic, and was how to make the new Grosvenor Square much greener with community involvement. There are a number of different people involved. Some people wanted there to be a more naturalistic effect, so plant more ornamental plants and make it aesthetically pleasing for the visitors and for the residents. And some, like myself, wanted that. Yes, there needs to be a balance of everything, but we wanted something more wild, something a little bit more, build more habitats like hedgerows and woodlands and meadows, and designate certain areas of the square, sort of set aside some land to make those habitats. So I think that's ongoing, and that's been going on for quite a number of years. But they have really emphasised the need for business and local communities to collaborate. And then with, what was the other question? Was it on
the role of leadership
among politicians?
Public engagement.
Yeah, so what I've been involved in has been very positive. Of course, it won't always be that way, and it hasn't always been that way we look at the bigger picture. But I think that there does need to be better direction when it comes to public engagement on the climate and nature crisis, what government and policy needs to say about that, but also make sure that people are aware of wildlife around them. I think often we all live in our own little bubbles. We are all focused on getting from A to B, whether it's on the tube or going for a walk or going to work, but we don't realise the fantastic wildlife that's on our doorstep and the extent of different habitats around us. I think that's something that government should shine a light on as well, and policy should encourage them. People should be aware of the incredible wildlife around them. Yes, wildlife is in decline, but there is still so much that we have left that is precious and that is worth saving, and people need to notice, appreciate, and protect that. And to that end, if I were to wave a magic wand, I would say we actually need to protect our protected wildlife sites because they've been neglected for too long. We have sites of special scientific interest that are not in favourable condition. We have different competing land uses in our national parks. National parks aren't really the best place for wildlife and for ecosystems at the moment. That is changing on a small level, but I think there needs to be a better approach to that, and I think in policy that is developing, so I'm more optimistic about that. But we need to join up and make our wildlife sites more resilient, protect what we already have, restore wildlife on a large scale, and reconnect people of all different backgrounds, ages and abilities to our protected wildlife sites so that everyone can enjoy nature around them.
Thanks, Kabir. Just before we wrap up, I've been asked to draw your attention to a youth collective called Arts Train, who are going to be performing in the vaults where you're having lunch at about now. So sorry you couldn't get to everyone who wanted to ask questions. That's a tribute to how interesting the panel have been. So thank you very much for turning out. Thanks to everyone watching online. And above all, thank you to our panel. Kabir, Lorraine.